I guess the first thing we have to point out is that there is a thread of argument, I called it a discursive research, that says that every sport mag event has been successful in the past. It doesn't matter if it happened in the global north or in the global south. If we acknowledge that, then we can start analyzing past cases, and then we are going to learn some things. For example, mainly economic aspects, international image, and also now legacies are considered the main parts of a country's bid for a sport mag event, at least from the point of the organizers and the governments. And if we use this framework to analyze the World Cup that took place in 2014 and the Olympics that took place in 2016 in Brazil, then we learn that they weren't positive for Brazil. Mainly because, just like every other country, Brazil didn't get anything positive in economic aspects from sport mag events, because the state funded almost everything that had relation to the World Cup and didn't get enough money to cover those investments. Secondly, because the image of Brazil didn't change with all this investment. So research has shown that although Brazil was portrayed as capable and also as a splendor of nature, the social inequalities are still a problem in Brazil. And that's very important for us because apparently the government wanted to show a different country and spend a lot of money to do that, and they weren't able, which on the other side may be considered a bit positive because it is a cruel reality in Brazil, social inequality. And finally, the argument, or at least the narrative that embedded sport mag events, legacies to sport mag events, is also a bit, can be considered by us as something not very strong, because legacies are nothing more than, at this point, a discursive research of sport mag events enthusiasts at this point. And of course, we have a lot of examples in Brazil, like the football stadium that was built in Manaus, Amazon, which is a problem now for them, or the one that was built in Brasilia, and also a lot of facilities that were built in Rio de Janeiro and now are abandoned and are real white elephants. I would say yes, but we have to look at it at least through the lens of the global divide. So in my research, I looked at it using the framework of the global north and the global south. Mainly, you are going to find the same impacts in the global north and in the global south, but they are softened in the global north and they are harder in the global south. For example, you are going to have people displaced in the global north, but they are probably going to be treated in a more just and honest way than people in the global south is treated. Also, the investments from the government are going to be more controlled, and they are going to be in specific areas, while in South Africa, Brazil, Russia, and China, you're going to see a lot of government investment and sometimes even a lot of corruption, so money that goes and never comes back. The first thing to mention in relation to that is that we have very little research on sport mag events, and most of this research is funded by bodies related to the IOC and FIFA, and also published by stakeholders, like reports from NGOs and companies that are related to the sport mag event system, which is not which cannot be considered directly bad, but if you don't have independent and autonomous research on sport mag events, then you are probably not going to see some of the results of sport mag events, but because they are not interesting for some of the actors involved. So this far, it would be very difficult for anyone to say that you can find specific positive traits within sport mega events. Of course, some of the enthusiasts are going to say that some of the consequences of sport mega events are not tangible, so cannot be measured, like the happiness of people and things like that. But again, if you look at it through any specific lens, so any specific framework, you are going to find a very contradictory field of studies. And I mentioned before, we have been studying the economic impacts, also the impact in the image of the country abroad, and also the narrative of legacies. But then you can go into human rights, into working and employment consequences, and every time you go into specifics, you're going to find contradictory results within published research. But in fact, from my point of view, what we have within the setup of sport mag events nowadays is a very corporate initiative taken by these bodies like FIFA and the IOC. And so, because they are living within this corporate world, they are going to always try and fit the narrative to justify the profit they make from the sport mag events. Instead of just talking about Barcelona, we can add Los Angeles to that as well. So we have very specific features for Los Angeles 84 and Barcelona 92. So let's start with Los Angeles. First thing, Los Angeles was the sole contender for the Olympics that year. And that made their bid to be a bit different, or actually very different from others. And one of the main features of that bid is that it was totally privately funded. And also it was the first sport mag event, and maybe the only, to be profitable for the organizers. So let's keep that for later. Privately funded. Then we go to Barcelona 92. Of course, Barcelona is always mentioned as a positive example of sport mag event of the Olympics. And in fact, some of the results of that project were considered by people in Barcelona and also other people who made research there as a positive case. So we can mention the refurbishment of parts of the city, like the old port, and also construction of popular housing as positive aspects. But in general, sport mag events enthusiasts forget to mention at least three very important processes that were going on in Barcelona at the time of the games or before the games. The first is that the dictatorship in Spain had finished, so Madrid, as they say there, started to send money to the region, to Catalonia, to try and prevent separatists from getting more people convinced. The second thing is that European Union was also starting to fund projects in the area, so they got money from European Union to their projects. And then maybe even more important, the city was very well organized through residents' associations. So in fact, Barcelona had an impressive urban development plan in place at that time. It was so well organized that the Olympics had to fit into those plans. And then they produced a very positive, or at least an Olympics edition that was very positively perceived by people there. So if we get these 4 features, then maybe we could produce a new good edition of Sport Mag events. Which are they? They have to be privately funded. They have to get external funding, not only local funding. If they get investment from the government, it has to be the national government and not the local government. And finally, the Olympics the World Cup or Sport Mag event has to fit within the city plans and not the opposite. So if you get, at this moment, these 4 features, I don't think FIFA or the IOC would give you an edition of the Olympics of the World Cup. So to answer directly your question, theoretically, yes, it is possible for us to think of a positive Sport Mag event. In fact, at this point in history, I wouldn't be very positive about that. We have to first consider the policies put in place by FIFA and the IOC for Sport Mag events. So the beginning of the 21st century displayed a tendency of sending Sport Mag events away from the economical axis, which is Northern Europe and Northern America. So we would have World Cup and Olympics in places like South Africa, Brazil, Russia, China, etc. Apparently, this moment has passed, and now you're gonna start having Sport Mag events again in places like Paris, London, and other cities in the United States and places like that. So that might make it more difficult for places like Slovakia to get Sport Mag events. Then the second thing is that sometimes what is required for countries, it is a list of such enormous efforts that you have to make that it's not worth it. That's a second thing. And third, if we compare then the examples I gave earlier, we have to ask as well, what are Slovakian plans for the future? What is development? What in development is important for Slovakia? If it is spending a lot of money to get a better image abroad, maybe it is a good investment if you can control it. Let's just talk about Qatar. Qatar got the World Cup for 2022, and if you ask people around, probably most of them are going to tell you that what they know about Qatar and that people working there are living in a slavery-like system of work. So imagine how much Qatar is spending on the World Cup, and their international image is actually getting worse than it was before. Then you have economy. So if the plans of Slovakia would be getting some economic advantage from the Sport Mag event, then forget it. You're not going to get it. Never in history before a country got anything in economic terms from Sport Mag events. And third, the narrative of legacies. If Slovakia wants to increase or improve their infrastructure or sport infrastructure or infrastructure in general, then maybe Slovakia has to plan very well, because what we have seen in the past is that most of infrastructure built for Sport Mag events become white elephants, or on the other hand, you have to spend 3-4 times more to build the same infrastructure because you have a very tight timeline. So my recommendation for Slovakia, if they want to bid for a Sport Mag event, is first build a very strong case study based on ex post facto research and not prediction and ex ante studies. I guess we have to consider two dimensions for that. The first one is the sport dimension. Some scholars have even mentioned that sport might look like the you're going to have to cut because I need to remember a word, which is secular. Okay, so I can start from there. I don't have to start from the beginning. Yeah. So we have to consider at least two dimensions. The first one is sports. So some scholars have even mentioned that sport is the secular religion of our times. So a lot of people are totally devoted to sports, and they can only see the positive side of sports. For example, in some places, people believe that sport is health. But then you ask them, what about doping? And they cannot answer that. In the case of sport mag events, people say, yeah, sport mag events are great and they are positive. And then you say, yeah, but have you seen what they have done to poor people in South Africa and Brazil? They cannot answer to that. So that's one dimension. People want sport mag events, people want sports, people believe in sport, love sports, they live sports, and that's it. And almost irrational. The other dimension is that some of the concepts that we use to explain social phenomena, they hide internal divisions. For example, when we say Brazil bid for the World Cup, we are actually saying Brazilian elite bid for the World Cup. So if you see the pictures, you're going to see key actors from the government, from the companies, from the corporate world, rich people sending messages. Why are those people so interested in sport mag events? Because they are the ones who are going to be profiting from sport mag events. If you ask normal people, real people in the streets, they barely know about the plans. They start to learn about the plans at the time that the cities start to change and they see disruption in the transport system, construction sites, and they start to learn that a lot of money is going to be spent in sport mag events. So that's the recent story of Brazil, South Africa, and other places that have been facing problems with sport mag events. And associated with the elites, you are going to have one of the strongest actors in our times, the media. And the media is understood sometimes as the actor responsible for transmitting the games. But that's not all. The media is also very interested in sport mag events because they are involved in one of the main sources of profit within sport mag events, which is image rights selling. So they would buy image rights from the franchise owner, FIFA or the IOC, and then they will sell it again in a series of different contracts which involve free-to-air TV, pay-per-view schemes, merchandising, and other forms of selling sports. If we get these two dimensions together, then sometimes it feels that sport mag events are unstoppable, like a force of nature. On the other hand, if I may add, the case of South Africa, but specifically Brazil, showed that sport mag events aren't safe as they thought they were. So I believe that one of the reasons why they are getting sport mag events back to their stronghold, to Europe and the United States, because they are afraid of what can happen to their events if they keep doing what they have been doing in the Global South. I guess there is a very interesting aspect of sport mag event studies that I haven't mentioned yet, is that it is a very multidisciplinary area in which every scholar, student is welcome to study, because it is a very young and new area. And if you are thinking of studying about sport mag events, I have only one suggestion for you. You read everything you find. yeah, that's good. You try and find things in English, in different languages, different points of view. That would be amazing, of course. But then be aware that there is a stream of thought within Sport Mag events that is built upon ex-ante studies, so predictions, and that can be very tricky. So if you want to produce solid research, maybe you can pay attention to ex-post research, so research that is done during or after the Sport Mag events, so you can measure the real impact of Sport Mag events. I believe that's a good tip, and I believe that you would be doing fine if you take into account what I just said. Thank you.